Hello. Hello, everyone. If you could please start taking your seats, we're going to kick off in the next 20 seconds. Thank you so much for coming this morning, and I hope you all enjoy.
Yes, that was very good. Everybody keeping distance from the moderator this morning. That's a good sign. Don't worry. Yeah, you can move that. Gives me an overview. Good morning, everybody. My name is Martin Hojsík. I'm a member of European Parliament and come from Slovakia. And obviously, I'm from one of the ALDE member parties, Progressive Slovakia. Now, I'm very happy to be able to welcome you on today's stakeholder event, Road to Circularity, Boosting Recycling Rates in Europe. Now, we have right now on our table the very important legislation that's going to look into the circularity in more practical terms. And therefore, it's really great for me that I'll be able to moderate this event, where we welcome a number of the speakers on a very hot topic. My colleague Nils Torvalds from the ENVI committee, who will have to run just before 9 because he has a vote to attend, sadly. Then we have Johan Aurik, who is the global managing partner from Kearney. And last but not least, and Floor Uitterhoeve?
Uitterhoeve.
Uitterhoeve. My Dutch is really bad, I'm sorry for it. Who is the European Market Sustainability Director of McDonald's. Now, it's really good that we have industry stakeholders, and I'm really happy to see quite some crowd at this morning hour. And let me kick off by giving a short introduction words to the panelists. And then I can hope we can swiftly move also to the discussion, because that's what is it about, to discuss and be finding the best way forward. So let me start before he runs away with Nils. Few introductory remarks. That's what I'm trying to do.
Actually, Martin had said that we're going to find some practical answers. The problem is actually that we have a lot of unpractical answers, and that's disturbing me. On the table, we have a huge package for packaging waste. I think from an architectural point of view, what we have is something which is trying to take care of the real problem. We have too much packaging waste. Everybody in the parliament is, I think, agreeing on that part. But upstreams from the packaging coming to your doors and downstreams from that, you have actually very different technical structures. And the problem with the proposal from the Commission is that there is no impact assessment upstreams and no impact assessment downstreams. And therefore, when I spoke to the ENVI person in charge of the file, she was very unhappy because she won't be able to find very easy solutions on the issues. And that's actually where we stand. One way would be to just put it down the trash bin and wait for the next commission. But that would actually, at the same time, mean that we would lose about 3 or 4 years with an issue we don't have the nicety of losing. So therefore, what she's trying to do is to find some solutions where she's probably going under the level of the commission, and then try to find something which is doable during the trialogues with the council, just to be able to have a legislation done before the end of this mandate. So in a way, I think she is under heavy pressure. I am under some pressure from the ITRE side. My colleague from Agri is under some pressure, and some other guys are under some pressure to find solutions. But I think that the ultimate issue is to find solution on which we are able to conclude before March 24. That's the issue. I think this is good, my part of the introduction.
Thank you, Nils. And let me hand over the microphone, although you have your own one. So I'm not going to hand physically the microphone, just in imagination, to Mr. Aurik for the introductory remarks.
It is Johan for you.
Johan, thank you.
Good morning. I'm not a politician. I work for a management consultancy agency, one of the global ones. And the reason for the invitation is we conducted, and here's a report, and I'm sure you can get a copy of them. And if you don't, please ask us, and we'll make sure you get one. We conducted last fall a study on circularity, on packaging waste, specifically for the informal eating out sector, and I'll come back on that. We did that last year. It was commissioned in all transparency by McDonald's. The analysis and all the conclusions were ours, and we insisted on that to make sure that it's an independent, fact-based study. And the reason for underlining independent, fact-based study is that, and that echoes your point a little bit. There's a lot of debate about that, and I even call it jokingly sometimes religious debate. People follow solutions rather than finding the right fact-based answers. There's very little primary and secondary fact-based research on this topic. You would be surprised, very little. And this is the reason behind this is to ground the debate and to hopefully give some pointers of where the answers are or should be or what to avoid. So that was the background. That was the background of that. The focus was on what we called the informal eating out sector. It's a bit of a mouthful word. I apologize for that. It includes everything from indeed the McDonald's and the Starbucks of the world, but also the Frietkot on the Place Jourdan, not too far away from here. It's a special sector. It's responsible for roughly 1% of the packaging waste. So 1%. You could argue, you could shrug your shoulders on that. Every percentage is one, by the way, and it's also a very visible one. And that's why it gets a lot of attention, of course. But it's important to keep it in perspective. It's a special sector because it's largely small enterprises that run it. It's over 300,000 enterprises, companies in Europe are in this sector. The vast majority not changed. So 2/3 is independent, small mom and pop shops, you could call that. They are focused on convenient food that is relatively low in price. It's about €4 on average per meal. So it's a very small amount. So price and price competitiveness plays a very important role in the success of this sector, and it's important to keep it in mind. And the sector is changing rapidly. Certainly since COVID, a very large percentage, actually it's over 70% right now, 70, is not consumed in the shop itself or in the establishment itself, but it's consumed outside or at home or wherever it might be. So 70% is takeaway and only 30% is so-called dine-in. And that has very important consequences when you talk about packaging and packaging waste. It's important to keep that in mind. And finally, we're talking about food and consumers and consumer habits. And you can devise any regulation that you want, but you need to take it into account. There's food regulation and food standards, of course, and there certainly also is consumer behavior that you want to steer in the right way. And that's not so easy, particularly if you talk about takeaway consumption. The title of the report is No Silver Bullet, and that's just a title, but there was a good reason for it. We believe. And some people believe that the silver bullet is to insist on reuse across the board, mandatory reuse targets. And in some cases, that makes sense, by the way. We all know successful schemes for beer bottles in Germany, for instance. It's well known. And so certainly for certain materials and in certain sectors and for certain products, it's absolutely the right solution. Also, for instance, for certain dining sectors, like in most restaurants, when you order a cup of coffee, it's in porcelain and it's washed, and that generally works out quite well. But for a sector that's largely dependent on takeaway, on consuming out, and on a low cost price, this is becoming problematic. So to insist on the silver bullets that there's only one way is not the right solution we have found. Actually, it's counterproductive. We argue instead for a mix of solutions, and not one silver bullet, but several, and specifically also tailored, or at least giving the flexibility to be tailored for this sector. It's absolutely crucial that there will be legislation, by the way, because heaven forbid, the worst is if there's 27 different ones. That would not be good for anyone. That's quite clear. But it's very important that there is specificity is the key word, and the right metrics and the right set of solutions that allows flexibility for this sector to do this in a successful way.
Thank you very much. Madam Uitterhoeve.
Thank you. And thanks for having me this morning. I'm Floor Uitterhoeve. I work for McDonald's and I work on sustainability at McDonald's. So that will be the focus of how I look at the packaging waste regulation. And looking at the McDonald's sustainability strategy, both globally and in our markets, it's clear that packaging sustainability, circularity, they're really key priorities across the board, have been for a while. And it also shows from the commitments we've made globally and in the markets. So globally, we're working towards sourcing all of our guest packaging from recycled, renewable, or certified sources by 2025. And we've also committed to invest and implement solutions to drive the recycling of the waste that we produce through the packaging that we use. And Europe, the markets in Europe are really at the forefront of that strategy. It's here where we make the most progress, not in the last instance, fueled also by policy and regulation. In Europe, currently over 92% of our packaging is fiber-based. It's from certified sources, so sustainable forestry. And we have recycling bins and systems in place in the majority of our restaurants here in Europe. I'm starting with these statements not to indicate or imply in any way that we're done solving this problem. We know there's a problem. We know even if it's just 1%, there's a lot of waste and a lot of packaging used in the sector and at McDonald's as well. The reason why I start with these statements is to indicate that we're serious about this topic and we want to be part of the solution. We know we need to do more. We know our sector needs to do more. We know the value chain needs to do more, needs to do better. And we also need regulation for sure. And for that regulation to be effective, it's important that it's fact-based, it's consistent, and it's implementable. And I think the packaging waste regulation that we have in front of us now, the proposal, there's some really good content in there. There's elements that will be really impactful in driving circularity and waste reduction. And it's a great opportunity to get it right, the packaging and packaging waste regulation process. But there's also some elements in that regulation that we're really concerned about, and that's the restrictions on our ability to use paper, lightweight, sustainable packaging, and the single focus on reuse as the assumed better solution. As has already been indicated by the previous speakers, those measures, the reuse targets and the restrictions on paper-based packaging are not based on facts, and we miss a thorough impact assessment that guides us that way. We are really concerned about the unintended consequences that these measures would have on the environment, on the economy, on the consumer, and on things like food safety. We wanted to understand reuse better for ourselves, so that's why we commissioned the impact assessment that Kearney did. And we also see on the ground, through the work we're doing on reuse in markets like France and Germany, that these consequences are happening. And as someone that's working in sustainability, of course, I'm mostly focused on the environmental impacts and consequences. And the key problems that we see with reuse in our sector, in the way that we produce and serve food and drinks, are threefold. We see a sharp increase in energy use because of all the washing and drying that we need to do with reusables. Related to that, a sharp increase in water consumption, which we know across the continent is going to be a key challenge in the future. And the third one, and that's the one I'm most concerned about, to be honest, is a sharp increase in the amount of plastic waste. And that sounds counterintuitive because that's what we've been trying to solve for years. We want to get away from plastics. We want to reduce plastics. But by shifting from lightweight paper packaging into thick reusable plastics that only get used a few times because they get lost, people don't return them, they are stolen, and we have to take them sometimes out of rotation because we can't assure the safety because we don't know where they've been. That leads to 4 to, I believe, 16 times the amount of plastic waste that we currently have in the market. So really concerning impacts for us, and for us also the reason to believe that instead of reuse, in our case, in our circumstance, driving recycling of that lightweight, sustainable fiber packaging is a much better way to go. Again, we know we're not done yet there. We know more can be done. We need to improve and scale the solutions that we have in place, both for our dine-in waste as well as for the waste that leaves our restaurants. But we have really good programs and examples from across markets that it can be done. And we achieve recycling rates in Poland, in Italy, and in other markets that are really good, that we want to build on and expand on to achieve those better environmental results. We need regulation. We need the incentives and the enforcement of accountability throughout the value chain. So it would be great to discuss with this group and with you all how we can ensure that that's part of the regulation that's being developed now.
Thank you, Flor. And yes, Nils, back to you before you run away.
Yes, I'm going to run in some minutes. If you would visit Helsinki on the 1st of May, you would, if you would be out early in the morning, you would see something which is extraordinary. There's a Finnish habit on the last day of April to drink a lot of booze outside. And when you have been consuming a lot of booze, you are probably prone to leave the bottles there. So at 2 o'clock in the morning in Helsinki, on all the grassland you can find there and the park, you're going to find a tremendous lot of bottles. And five hours later, you won't find a single one, because the return rate is extremely big. Why? Because all the guys at the age of 10, 15, they earn a lot of money during this morning because they are collecting all the bottles, they're bringing them to the nearest supermarket, and they get the money out of it. That's a very well-functioning system. It's functioning in Finland, it's functioning in Sweden, in Norway, and in Denmark. What we can't understand why the Commission isn't forcing this good functioning system on all the other countries. So we're waiting for a good answer, because if you do this way, you're going to find solutions which are functioning. Then we have small problems with, and that goes for the German beer bottles, where you have a fairly small market, area-wise, a very small market. Then it's easy for the brewery to collect the bottles and get them back to the factory. But as soon as you are Carlsberg or a big Belgian factory, you have operations worldwide, and there it doesn't function in the same way. So you have to understand that depending on the size of the market, you need to have different decisions. Then we have studied what McDonald's is trying to do, because every time we come back from Strasbourg, this is an advertisement, we stop at McDonald's in Luxembourg, and what do we get? Yes, we get a big meal, and we get a plastic thing to bring back home. I think I have 5 or 6 of them already. The problem with this plastic is that when it has been going around for some time, it's not suitable for any process, it's just waste. And the second problem is that the plastic is actually produced in China, and we don't think that this is a good solution. So some of the solutions the Commission came up with are not actually working. Some of the examples the Commission came out with are childish. You have the old British milkman sort of coming with the 2 bottles of milk every morning to your doorsteps, as if the Commission didn't remember that we actually had Brexit some time ago. And I don't think the milkman is actually working in Great Britain either these days. We have a very interesting example from California on cradles for agricultural products. It's a good system presented, but it's again a very small market. So my guess is that the Commission was in a time squeeze, and therefore they came up with something to get through the mill in due time before the end of this mandate, and therefore we are going to have a problem how to do it right, because as I think everybody here understands, we need to get some remedy for all the waste we have, and therefore we are probably forced to cut down on the proposal from the Commission just to have something which will work for the next few years. That's my take on it, and thank you so much. And send me your greetings, what you have been saying after that I left. Thanks.
Thank you, Nils. Now I have my questions, but but I'm actually more interested in your questions, because I think it shouldn't be discussion between me and the panelists, but between you and the panelists. Yes, that was the first one over there. Yes, you, sir.
For me, it's the same. Should I speak with the microphone? Coming. Thanks. I'm Stefan speaking from the European Parliamentary Research Service. Does it work?
Now it should be.
It's green.
Yeah, now it's working.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I was missing something. So I'm from the European Parliamentary Research Service. My question is about someone mentioned about the consumer behavior. So if you studied how the consumers they are available to change their behavior, and if they eventually will renounce to some packaging, and if this is feasible according to the food protection rules. And then if you can give some highlights of some study and research that eventually McDonald's has done on some innovation in packaging, I don't know, eatable packaging or things like that. I'm sure you have some lab studying on very innovative kind of solution. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to use the liberty and actually its power of moderator and add on to it, because there was something I wanted to ask as well in some way was, okay, one of the things I do myself is I bring my own packaging. Now, is it something that from your point of view is also feasible that to have a system where the consumer instead rejects your packaging and brings their own packaging?
Yeah, thanks for the questions, and happy to share some thoughts, and then I think Johan maybe can add some from the study that Kearney did. On consumer behavior, we know there's interest among customers to contribute to reducing waste, and they're interested in playing a part. They're also expecting us as a company to do what we can do to make it easy for them and to make it accessible. We've been working for a long time, and not just McDonald's, also municipalities and other brands, to get customers to recycle and use the recycling bins and understand the colors and the labels, etc. That already is proving to be quite challenging, but we are making progress because it's an getting easier process to understand. When we ask them to switch to reuse, that entirely changes their experience. Customers come to McDonald's and other brands for convenience. They want a quick meal or drink on the go, and for them to have to think about either bringing something into the store that allows them to consume, like a cup or a container, or if they get something from McDonald's, bring that back in a couple of days or weeks or months or even years, because most customers don't visit McDonald's more than a few times a year. That creates a lot of additional burden. And we see in practice, it's early days, but in the experiences in Germany, for example, where we offer a reusable option to all customers, there's really low uptake. People are not really interested. They're not using the option. Most people don't. In France, where we offer reusables as a default for dine-in consumption, so you don't even have the choice for a single-use item anymore. A customer use it, of course, but we still see that getting them returned, even in a dine-in environment, is challenging, and we lose about 15% of the items that we hand out, and they're not even supposed to leave the store. So it's those customer behavior patterns that we really need to take into account. And in our space, in our business, in our convenience sector, reuse is proving to be really challenging. On the bring your own, we do bring your own in some markets, mostly on coffee cups. Again, we don't see a lot of customers doing it. If we would need to expand that into all packaging items, we would be really concerned about food safety implications, because it means that we have to accept something that the customer brings from home. We don't know what that item has been used for, and it will likely come into contact with our equipment, with our crew. So that's something we really want to avoid, because then we cannot manage food safety accurately anymore. That needs to be scaled.
Anything to add?
It's hard for me to add anything to this. But one thing to keep in mind is that, as I mentioned, we need to. The expression is horses for courses. So you need to, for specific situations, you need to have specific solutions to be the most effective. That is what we have found. And as you see in the study, we actually have investigated a whole mix of the different circularity options. So take your own cup, or recycle, or biodegradable, or whatever. You take the whole range, and then you look at all the different packaging types that there are. And there's many different types. You mentioned the cup. If you take your cup of coffee or cola or whatever you buy, there's many different types. There's food wrap, there's etc. So you look at all these options. There is actually an optimum, or the least bad option, and so it's important to take specificity into account. But what a lot of people tend to forget is that the solution also needs to be system-based. That is, you cannot only rely on the consumer to change their behavior, because they will over time with enough pressure, but it's going to be really hard. It makes sense to do it across the system. So it needs to be the government participating. It needs to be the waste industry participating in this. It needs to be indeed the sector itself participating in that. It needs to be a system-based solution. So the best outcome we have found is a mix, specificity, and allow flexibility for each sector. That's number one. And number two is a system-based approach that involves everyone in the whole value chain. And it's too easy, and I call that religious. It's too easy to pick one solution, whatever it is, and to throw it over the wall and to ask from an industry or a company, solve it. I'm going to mandate you to do that. That's from a it's lazy legislation, if you don't mind me saying so. And some people might be insulted by that, but I really think it's important to take that into account. So.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yeah, there is time.
Please raise your hands for more questions.
When I mentioned the consumer behavior, I was thinking also to some, let's say, creativeness that can be used by the company. So let's suppose that as company, I disclaim it's years that I'm not entering a McDonald's, so I can say something wrong. But I remember that when I was going, there was, the hamburger or whatever, and there was this hard paper packaging. So what about if you propose a different pricing? So you can get your hamburger with a napkin, or you can get with the hard paper box, but then you pay 50 cents more. Sometimes, some of the McDonald's consumer, they can be price sensitive, especially if they're young and so on. So it's a way to price the externalities and to make the consumer choice. So I want to pay for that externalities or not. And for you, at the end, it can be part of the solution. And the same kind of creativeness you may maybe apply for the goblet. But okay, we speak maybe not now, but the side, or I send some email. Thanks.
Yeah, happy to respond. I think those are really interesting ideas. So far, the approach we take when it comes to packaging innovation, because I know that was also a question you asked, is to do it more across the board. Because we have so many people coming to McDonald's every day, it's millions per day in Europe alone. We have the opportunity to raise the bar, even with small steps, create a big impact. So the example you're giving for the hamburgers, quite a lot of sandwiches that we serve, also local promotion sandwiches, we actually changed from a box into a wrapper, saving a lot of paper and a lot of waste. We can't do it with all of our sandwiches because some are too big and it makes it difficult to eat. But making that change across the board immediately reduces the waste and creates a positive impact. So where we can, we don't want customers to have to worry about that. We'd rather make those changes ourselves. But in some instances, yeah, we're going to need them to play a part. Yeah.
Thank you. More questions? Yes, please, don't be a shy audience.
Thank you. I'm Johan. I'm from Renew as well, from the Renew IMCO shadow, talking about energy and logistics of renewable packaging. This is something that I have had extreme problems finding some proper primary research about. So could you comment a little bit more about the actual numbers, and maybe share the study, because that would be extremely helpful. That's one question. The other question is for McDonald's. You mentioned some numbers on refillables from the German market. I think Nils would probably say something about how a recycling system requires significant investments in infrastructure and in a recycling culture. So I'd be very interested if you have similar numbers from the Scandinavian markets, and maybe what we could do in the regulation to make it easier to use some of the refillables.
Want me to start with that? Well, you mentioned the logistics, and logistics indeed play a key role in this. As I mentioned, roughly 70% of the sector is takeaway, and most of the takeaway packaging tends to be fiber-based because it's light, it's cheap, it's relatively thin. Let's say that the regulation would force mandatory reuse for everything, for the whole sector, blanket for the moment, an extreme scenario. Then the result is an enormous increase in plastic waste because this fiber-based needs to be replaced by plastic. But since you want returnability and you need to have a number of return runs for it to be economically viable, and that's a little bit more than just a few, than a handful. It means dozens for it to be economically viable. That means that there needs to be cleaning and transportation and runs, etc. The Frietkot on the Place Jourdan that I mentioned does not have a lot of space to do cleaning and take-in. So often the economic solution for doing that is to centralize that in a city or in a neighborhood. And that increases the number of transportation runs, as you can imagine. So you can calculate various scenarios, but in any scenarios, the number of transportation runs and the logistics cost and also the environmental impact of those transportation costs is increasing dramatically. Forcing mandatory reuse on this sector has, and you see that in the report, and again the report is on the internet, so you can download it there, and the sources are in there as well, by the way, so you can have a look at that. Increases it dramatically, 1,500% increase in plastic waste by shifting takeaway from paper-based, what it currently is, to reuse. So a massive increase. And I'm not even talking about the cost, just purely the environmental impact. And a big portion is that the increase in plastic waste, but actually the largest portion is indeed in logistics, returnability, water usage to clean all of that. So it's something that you need to think through. That's precisely why I keep arguing for is multiple solutions, allow for that flexibility in the legislation, allow for different paths to lead to Rome, so to speak. So that's number one. And number two is look for a system-based approach. Is there anyone from Italy here in the room? Well, there you are. For those of you familiar with that, in Italy, there has been since a number of years already a very successful recycling scheme. And there's an agreement basically across the value chain that the recycling, the waste generators, and the waste companies have an agreement to pick up the food waste from this. It's generally well accepted. And the result is recycling rates in Europe tend to be relatively low, by the way, around 15% on average, we estimate, something like that. There's very few data on this, but in Italy, it's significantly higher. So there are already examples of where this can take place. Again, that particularly applies to takeaway. There are certain areas, like for instance in dine-in for certain cups, where it does make sense, and you can even put a deposit on it to further increase that. But the big argument that we have, and the big plea that we have, is allow for that flexibility and the multiple use to achieve a result.
Thank you. Question.
Okay. You mentioned Italy. First of all, my name is Roberto Ferrini. I'm a consultant on environmental issues. You mentioned Italy. I think we have two elephants in the rooms concerning this packaging regulation. The first is incineration, and the second is exactly the difficulties in developing the recycling infrastructure. And we need to be clear here. On one side, there are enormous economic and financial interests in keep promoting incineration, because also for energy production, of course, those facilities get subsidies for producing renewable energy. And on the second side is the lack of development of proper recycling infrastructure. So the example you made in Italy is a perfect example of how you can overcome those kind of problems. And I don't know why there are 20 years, more or less, we apply these kind of solutions in Italy. I don't know why this is not possible to do it in Germany, but because in Germany, there are a lot of incinerators. So we need to also face those two elephants in the room. The second elephant, besides incineration, is the infrastructure, the recycling infrastructure. Member states didn't invest enough. But again, the example of Italy, by putting together local communities, municipalities, waste operators, and citizens, we can try to solve the problem, getting more financial resources to develop more efficient recycling infrastructure. At the basis of this also, there is the obligation of separate collection of bio-waste that in Italy entered into force already more than 10 years ago. And you know that in Europe, there will be an obligation. It depends from the member states, starting from January 2024, for separate collection of bio-waste. But again, this is not a mandatory obligation all around Europe. So incineration and recycling infrastructure, the EPR schemes in other countries, they don't work. I mean, let's be clear. So those are also problems that need to be addressed. And this piece of legislation, this is my humble opinion, doesn't address properly. Thank you.
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
Thanks for that comment. And I agree with a lot of that. I do think there has been a lot of progress in developing recycling infrastructure, including EPR schemes. We pay into those EPR schemes in most markets. Some of them work, some have challenges for sure, but we do see that as a really promising and the right way to address packaging waste. And for example, in Portugal, up until now, our packaging was never accepted in kind of the municipal waste collection scheme, so the blue bin for paper. Through collaboration in the value chain with suppliers, with that EPR scheme, now we have made the change that packaging can be accepted in the blue bin. So we actually create the opportunity for customers, both in store and on the go and at home, to use recycling systems and deposit our waste into those systems as well, so that it can get recycled. But I'm with you that we need more improvements and more investments in that space. Why I'm concerned about that singular focus on reuse as an assumed solution for our sector is that I'm afraid we're going to throw away those investments and the progress we've made on the recycling side and the progress we're still planning to make, and start from scratch with reuse. Because for reuse, we also need infrastructure. We also need customer behavior and even bigger changes than we've seen with recycling. So instead of scaling and overcoming the barriers and making recycling work better, building on what we've done in the past, we're going back to square one, and we'll face the same barriers, even bigger ones.
Yes.
I could not agree more with your comment that infrastructure is needed. That's precisely, I was arguing for a value chain, a systemic approach to this, and not throwing it over the wall and forcing one group of companies to solve everything for them. In the UK, for instance, the opposite of Italy, I think there's less than a handful of recycling centers, so it's very, very few. And with the consequences attached to it. So if successful legislation needs to take care of investments in that infrastructure and maybe help poorer member states to develop that would be a great initiative. That would help. It needs flexibility in terms of the different approaches. Like I said, allow for different ways to go to reach Rome in this case, or Milan, whatever your preferred city is. And so allow for different ways to do that, and ask for the industry to invest and particularly to innovate. And there's many more solutions that is possible. There's a lot of innovation still to be done in this sector. And what you need for that is harmonized legislation and a good long-term view, so you can make those investments over the long run. And not uncertainty is the worst thing for innovation in general. So.
Thank you. I don't see any hands. I'm going to use the opportunity. Now, few challenges to address. One question is for me, how do you deal with basically the food waste attached to the paper waste? So how does this impact the recyclability when the sauce gets out of my burger, as you call it, surprisingly for me, sandwich? Or the mayo on the paper from the fries. Second, it's not just paper. Let's be honest, there is different coatings. Now, how are you addressing this vis-a-vis the recyclability of that material? And also as someone who works a lot on chemicals as well, things like PFCs used to be used. I hope they're not anymore. Now, how is this being addressed in terms of the problematics of the food contact materials and the chemicals of concern being used in the food contact materials?
Yeah, so to reassure you on the last point, we're not using those chemicals of concerns in our food packaging, so that's out of the way. You're right that not all of our packaging is 100% fiber. Most of it is. Our cups are the key ones where we have indeed the little polyethylene liner on the inside, and our cold cups, it's also on the outside to deal with condensation. Despite those liners, they can be recycled. We have multiple markets, Italy, but also Germany, Poland, Portugal now since recently, where the mills have been able to recycle it, either in a standard mill or in a specialized mill, by soaking the plastics off and getting access to clean, good, long fibers that are actually really interesting for recyclers. It does require in every market that we get around the table with those recyclers, with the collectors, to agree that those cups can be accepted, and in what mix of paper that the recycler takes, they can be input. So it's never 100% cups. It's always a mix of different inputs where our cups can be accepted in most markets. Not in all markets we're there yet, so we have to continue those conversations and negotiations, but we don't, technically, there's no problem. The food contamination, again, indeed, it's a challenge. We know some of our packaging is contaminated, and again, there's ways to deal with that. In some markets, it's no problem at all. Taking Italy again as the example, our waste as a whole is considered acceptable by recyclers nationally, and because it's part of that mix of inputs into a mill, the contamination in total is really low. So the amount of fiber is sufficient for the recyclers to accept it. In other markets, Poland came up already. What we've done there is we used to have our waste from restaurants collected by the municipal waste haulers. They were not able or willing to sort it for recycling. We said, okay, then we'll do it ourselves. So McDonald's there took ownership of their own waste collection and directly worked with a recycler to invest in a pre-treatment step. So a simple step with steam. Our packaging goes into there. The residual grease and food is separated from the fiber, and then the fiber goes into a regular recycling mill. Different way of doing it. I think it's a really interesting way, and we're looking at whether we can scale that to other markets as well. There are some items that are really too contaminated. Think about the little sauce cups or sometimes the wrappers. There we think and we know that compostability can be a good alternative to recycling because the food actually makes it nutritious for composting. So that's something that also in the Kearney report was identified as an opportunity in that mix of solutions that Johan mentioned.
And if I can follow up on that, because previously was stated 70% of the products bought are being on a takeaway basis. When in Poland you are taking care of the waste from the restaurants, what about the 70% of the waste that's taken home? And I cannot put it into, actually I like the colors because it's blue for paper, I think in most of Europe, but in Belgium, it's yellow.
Yeah.
I think we have to have just like one color for one
please.
thing across Europe. It's as simple as that. That would actually help.
I couldn't agree more.
That should be proposal number one, I think. Yes, I would.
So yeah, indeed, a lot of packaging waste leaves our store. It's even if we sell 70% of our products for takeaway consumption, actually quite a lot of that remains pretty close to our restaurants. We've done a study on that in the Netherlands a while back, where we actually saw that most people that order through the drive-through eat their meal on the parking lot. So still it ends up in, I see you looking concerned. Maybe they're on the way to work or they have like a telephone meeting. So we actually find a lot of that takeaway packaging waste into our bins or the bins around us that sometimes McDonald's also empties. So for that, if we can extend our in-store recycling systems to outside, we already can take care of quite a lot. So sticking with Poland as example, they have now placed recycling bins in the drive lane and on the parking lot as well to further increase the volume that they can collect. Still, quite some packaging, of course, travels further and ends up in municipal waste systems. So they're indeed making sure that the municipal systems, EPR schemes, can accept our packaging through labeling and through those arrangements. That's what we need to do. Sorry if I can make one more point. In between our restaurants and the households, that public space, that's also where a lot of our food and drinks are consumed. That's where we miss collection infrastructure. So I see that mentioned in the packaging waste regulation as a focus point for member states to make sure there we can also collect for recycling. At the moment, it's not in place. So that would be a key opportunity that we would love to invest in and contribute to, but it requires those municipal systems for public area collection and sorting.
Thank you. Oh, yes, there's a question in the back.
Thank you very much. Lara Carrier, I'm from Electrolux. So we place on the market home appliances, a Swedish company. I wanted to know if you also had the same issue as us as we were reading the Commission proposal. We have been looking a bit at the definitions used. Home appliances are actually specifically targeted in the reusability targets as an industry. So we need to have 90% transport packaging reusable. Now we have been basically asking the Commission, what is transport packaging? Because if you really think about it, for instance, for large home appliances, you always have the pallets, you have the straps around the pallets, you have cardboard box, but you also have, for instance, EPS that is always accompanying the large appliances. So if you get that transported to the consumer, and then the consumer says, take it back, was that then transport packaging or was that sales packaging? For instance, so those type of situations we're trying to clarify with the Commission. We really see, and as Mr. Torvalds was saying, that there's no impact assessment as well. That's basically one of the major issues that we're encountering. And secondly, the recyclable packaging definition is also something that we're looking thoroughly as well. Recyclable packaging needs to be recyclable at scale, covering 75% of the Union Europe. And we have been looking a bit around with the recycling industries in different member states. And of course, they are a bit nervous because if they would, I would say, establish EPR schemes for a certain packaging, it does not de facto mean that that packaging would be recyclable because potentially the other member states will not be establishing those EPR schemes as well. So there's a lot of nervousness, and I think, at least I hope that the Parliament and the Council will look thoroughly at the definitions to try to draw the accurate definitions for the legislation to actually work. So I just wanted to understand if you also had some issues with the definitions as well in your area.
Well, thank you, first of all. The study that we did was not for transport packaging, but for direct consumer packaging. And as mentioned, it was for the informal eating out sector and not for household. But some of the points that you mentioned, I fully recognize. If you want to be successful, it's really important to create a scale and at scale recycling industry. That's what Italy has done, by the way. And the more you can work towards designing, innovating the type of packaging so that for the recyclers, it becomes a resource, a raw material that is highly valuable, then you create a system that almost runs automatically. Economics basically takes care of it. You hardly need to legislate. That should be the direction of travel, I believe. So looking as much as possible for scalable, fully value chain solutions, involving the recyclers, involving the legislation, involving absolutely everyone across that chain. And if you can work, particularly in innovation, towards creating a raw material that is so valuable that everyone almost the example of the Finnish people that get drunk on, what was it, April? What did he mention? That's a nice example of that. So that's what we need to create. Then you create circularity. Floor?
Nothing to add.
We have 5 last minutes. So any last questions? Yes.
My name is Olaya Michelin. I work for Dental Global Advisor for several clients work on this topic. So I was very interested on your report and also this dogma of reuse that works in certain occasions, but not on all of them. And also many industry players also worried, as you're saying, about the investments done on recycling. So knowing the waste hierarchy that we have in the Waste Framework Directive and many actors interested on pushing reuse and recycling, how do you think it's possible to actually promote this in the legislation that that it's both are accepted when they make sense, as you're saying, as a systemic solution, because some countries are very advanced, like Belgium, and as you're saying, there's no recyclability at scale. If some countries are doing their job and they're already proposing new innovations, but it's not everywhere, so then that will go to the bin, and then basically you need to reuse. So I was interested to know how to push both things at the same time, and also the implications this has also for me on food contact materials, the whole food safety topic, which is also going to be reviewed, as you know.
Yeah, so the avenue we would really welcome is in more equivalence in treatment between those different circular solutions. So depending on what yields the best environmental outcomes that need to be assessed through that kind of life cycle wide view, we strongly feel that effectively recycling packaging or reusing packaging, both can work in different circumstances and both should be accepted and treated equally. So any targets should also look at those two options equally and accept it both. If we can prove we choose the option that works best environmentally. That's a key one. And then specifically looking at that takeout space, which is the largest part of our business, we know those environmental impact assessments won't be favorable towards reuse. So we don't even want to go there. We truly believe that driving recycling there is the better way to go. So instead of reuse targets, higher recycling targets potentially, or other ways to push for that recyclability, I think can be much more effective.
Yeah, I would agree. Equivalence is a good word. Make sure that the legislation is written in such a way that different paths can be achieved and can be chosen by the different industry in the different sectors, in the different markets. That's really important to do that. There's more though. Making sure that it's not only the companies selling it, the McDonalds of the world or the retailers or the restaurants or what have you, but also a total system approach, and make sure that the recyclers and the governments, the full value chain is involved in the legislation. Stimulate that, support that where needed. It's really important. Don't forget about the consumer. You mentioned the simple example of the yellow plus blue bags. That's one example. So making sure that things across Europe are as easy as possible. So the more convenience you give to the consumer, the more they're willing to do that. And people are willing to do that. There's no doubt about that. You just need to make it possible to allow for that. And finally, work towards a system so you can create scalable solutions as much as possible. Because the more you do that, the more the McDonald's and the more the Electrolux and all the other companies are incentivized to innovate and to invest for the long term. Because that's how the economics work.
Thank you very much. And actually, we have to end here. It's sad, but I see still some croissants there. I don't want to say they're all mine. My wife would kill me, and I should share anyway. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and thank you for this interesting discussion, and big thank you to our guests. And I hope that this is not the last one, because yet there is I think still lots of to discuss, not only on the packaging and packaging waste directive, but also on lots of other important pieces of legislation that are still in the pipeline before the next May. It's going to be very busy year, I can tell you. Thank you very much again, and see you again.